welcome to today's show, where I'm joined by Greg. I'm just calling him Greg. I don't know if you don't have like a moniker for your channel or anything.
Not really. I'm just Greg. Yeah.
Greg does videos or something, right? Your channel.
Yeah.
Don't know.
It's on YouTube. Greg does videos, and then TikTok and Instagram is Greg from Video One. Very creative branding.
And have you obviously? I came across you in the Jordan Peterson Jubilee debate, but you've done other Jubilee debates, right?
Yeah. So this is my fourth Jubilee video, my third shoot, because one of them was split up into two videos. I was in the Middle Ground XL, conservatives versus liberals, or whatever they called it, and then I was in the Surrounded LGBT with Michael Knowles.
Awesome. So what's the story with this one? Like, is Jordan Peterson someone that you've been particularly interested in, or it was just like they reached out to you and you were like, yeah, sure, I'll kind of like talk to this guy?
I saw it on the casting page. They have a public list of everything they're casting for. And I thought it was interesting because I had watched the Alex O'Connor one, which was the inverse of this. Alex O'Connor, the atheist, surrounded by a bunch of Christians. And I found it surprisingly productive and like respectful. And I was like, oh, I would find it interesting to have a conversation with like a Christian apologist who is, famous enough to be the person in the center. And so for this one, it was honestly just kind of curiosity. I do think that Jordan Peterson is bad in other ways. And so I think it's, sort of a indirect victory if Peterson loses a debate. But at the time when I was applying for it, I didn't know who we were going to be talking to. And I just thought it'd be kind of neat.
So, like reflecting on maybe first, like how that particular video has kind of like blown up and been, who knows how it's going to kind of like all play out, whether that will be it for Jordan Peterson in terms of his public career, or whether he'll kind of like peter out sort of thing, or maybe he'll have a big revival. But how do you feel the reception of that's been? Like, how has it affected you since, appearing in that video?
Yeah. So I think it's very interesting because I think Cade said yesterday when he was talking to you that these are usually like a Rorschach test. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but where, depending on who you are rooting for going in, that's who you think won. And what's interesting here is that the people who are ostensibly on Peterson's team, in terms of, like prominent conservatives, have really had a mixed reaction at best to his performance, which I think is a new thing for a Jubilee video. I personally have experienced this sort of odd dichotomy where I'm looking on the internet and there are people all over the world talking about it. But then, in real life, one person one time came up to me for a different Jubilee video and said, were you in like a YouTube thing? Like, otherwise I'm still just a complete nobody. Right. And so it's funny how like, it feels like there's this parallel universe I can only view through my laptop screen and my phone screen, within which everyone is talking about this thing. But then in real life, it's, I don't think most people I know even know who Jordan Peterson is.
Right.
So it's just been kind of a fun, surreal experience for me personally.
Yeah, I don't know if you've seen yet, but I just saw Danny on Piers Morgan.
Yeah, I just made a TikTok about that actually. Just because
yet, but yeah,
it was weird. It was like, so Piers, they didn't really talk about religion. Piers was just, like pride parades, why? Yeah. And then they talked and they were talking. I turned it off when they were talking about the R word.
Yeah, I saw that. And I've got the best watcher for that. Like, this is what I want to bring up with Danny. I want to say, how about fascist, Andrew? How do you feel about like that? Andrew, he would have exploded.
Yeah. Well, my thing is just like, I find it very annoying how a lot of people who are sort of reactionary conservatives frame sort of basic, easy to do respect and consideration in this context of like personal persecution. Like, oh, you're telling me I can't say this word, or you won't like it if I say this word. It's so whiny. It's like, dude, like I was thinking about how I had a lovely teacher when I was in high school, my French teacher. and she was so loving and caring, and the students picked up on that and tried to return it. And she had a daughter with severe cognitive disabilities, and it was clearly very important to her that we understand this and that we have some sort of sensitivity and understanding, regarding people like her daughter and families like her family. And then one day, this kid in the class, who the teacher happened to really like, loudly used the R word. And I saw the teacher just looked like she had been stabbed in the heart. And I was like, ooh, I don't want to make people feel that way. And it's very easy for me to just not use this word. No skin off my back. I'm just going to stop using it. It's like, just don't be a jerk. Like, it's not, not everything has to be this whiny framing. Oh, you think I can't say this?
Yeah. I think with that, it's also like super context dependent as well. Because like, yeah, sure, maybe if you were just with, your friends at the pub or whatever, you might. I'm not saying it would necessarily be a good thing, but there. But then maybe if you're around someone where like they've got a relative, maybe not. Like, why does it have to be this? Oh, you're insulting my speech. I'm just going to offend people. Yeah.
And I don't like flip out. Like people use that word around me, and I'll be honest, depending on how well I know them or not, right? Like if my car breaks down and the guy who comes to tow the car says the R word, I'm not going to have I'm in the passenger seat of the tow truck, I'm not going to lecture him on it. But like if it's a close friend, I'm just like, ooh, like maybe let's not say that, right? Not a big deal.
Yeah, it's super weird dynamic where those guys are just trying to like push taboos and boundaries and be as edgy. What's the edge? What's even more edgy than being a Nazi?
Yeah, well, because I think that especially like young men and young people respond well to that, where it's like, okay, you're a jerk, but in being a jerk, there is this sort of admirable honesty and bravery, where it's like, ooh, you're saying this thing that you're not supposed to say, and like, you're right. It's like everyone likes a bank robber in the movie, right? Like, or a cowboy or something or whatever. Nobody. There is no anti-hero in a movie who's like a tax cheat, right? If people are boldly subverting norms, there's something sort of admirable about the conviction in a weird way, and I feel like that's almost half of the appeal of it.
I think I'm maybe more cynical. Like I view it as being very much about like power and dominance displays, like particularly with like Wilson and Jay Dyer. Like I know that they're like, look at how powerful we are. We can do this thing that was so like
until you give them a pickle jar to open. Did you see that?
Yeah, that would have been a good one as well. I was thinking as well, like if I was Danny, there, I would have been like calm down, guys. Like you're having trouble opening your pickle jar or something. But I just think it's when they're like, because then Pierce comes in and goes, you can't even use the word mother in a hospital anymore. The power dynamic that's swung so far to the left. I'm like, have you looked at what's going on now? It swung so far to the left. Like,
and Pierce is such a coward too about like he makes pretend he doesn't think things. He's like, well, I don't think that there's anything wrong with this, but let's turn to our panelist, person who hates you. By the way, sorry for the bad accent. I have a sort of like post-colonial like infatuation with a British accent. Like it's like ooh, so it's coming from a place of admiration that I try to do that like bad Cockney whatever I'm doing.
No, it's all good. So my point anyway in raising the Pierce thing was like, this whole thing has kind of blown up so much. Like it's crazy to see, this guy Danny who I've known for a few years, just like I'm like, what's he doing on Pierce? Or even Jay Dyer who blocked me on Discord 5 years ago on Piers Morgan's show moaning about stuff. So like how has it? Do you feel that your social media profile has kind of like taken off a little bit as a result of this, or have you felt just like I'm doing a bit more? But
I mean, I think that well, one, I kind of stumbled into being in these Jubilee videos. It's just I live near where they film, and someone was like, "Hey, I was in a Jubilee video and it was fun. You should apply." And so I'm kind of like accidentally there, whereas a lot of other people who are there, like they fly themselves out to it. They already have like a brand and things they're building. I'm really just kind of like I just kind of wandered on set. So I think that my social media presence has definitely increased, in terms of like the percentage, but that was from like 100 people following me to 600 people following me. So I'm still kind of a nobody. In general, I think about Jubilee the way I think about something like a reality TV show, which is there are people who can break out, but they are the exception, not the rule. And the rule is that people tend to really care about you while you're on their screen in that moment. And then, like, you know, if you look a year later to see who is caring about what that person says, very few people are at that point still following you and interested in you, at least solely because of your appearance on the show. And so for me, it's like, I view going on Jubilee like if I was at a big concert and I got called up to get to play the guitar on the hit song. And it's like, oh, in those 5 minutes, everyone's looking at me.
Yeah.
But no one's coming up to me in the grocery store later like, hey, you know, you're the guy that played, you know, American Idiot with Green Day. It's like, no, I'm just some guy.
So with respect to your like engagement with like Peterson's views and stuff, or even actually maybe just before like your Peterson's views, but also maybe like the Christianity atheism sort of topic, like have you had an interest in that topic, or is it, you know, like obviously you're an intelligent guy and stuff, but I don't know. Yeah, I'm very bad at giving compliments, but yeah, like, you know, you've studied a bit, you know a bit of stuff, but is this like a particular area of focus for you in any respect? Or?
Not really. I mean, growing up, I had like a brief religion phase in middle school, it was not at all like, it was the opposite of Cade, where Cade, like, you know, studied all of the apologetics and was like, well, you know, here is my like logic mind palace within which I can, you know, grab and cite any argument. For me, it was just like I was bullied a lot at school, and then I kind of fell into this youth group, and it was this kind of very like emotional experience of like, oh, I feel belonging. And then at a certain point, I started to have this like sense of a presence that felt a lot like there was literally like something, you know, watching me. And then my freshman year of high school, I did a bunch of hallucinogens, and then I felt like the shampoo bottles were watching me in the same way. And I was like, oh, like this is just like something my brain can do. You know what I mean? I find it interesting. I find it like intellectually interesting to have the conversation. I think that I had been turned off from kind of diving into it more deeply in the past because I was exposed to the sort of like internet Reddit new atheist movement where it felt like a lot of it was just a way to feel better than other people. Just at least what I was exposed to, and I know that this is probably mischaracterization, and the mischaracterization would be a function of my lack of sufficient exposure, but just being honest about yeah. Or it was just like for example, my mother-in-law passed away last year, and she was like one of my favorite people in the whole world, and she was really religious. And so when somebody, you know, is like, "Oh, you believe in a man in the sky, you idiot," it's like, "Oh, you're calling my late mother-in-law an idiot." Right. And so I kind of have this just emotional bias where there's so many religious people who I, you know and love and respect in my life, in the history books and society today, where it's like, I really don't like that sort of like sneering approach, which was the one I was exposed to at the time when I could have really developed an interest in this. So yeah, not a strong interest. I thought it would be cool where it's like, oh, this is normally kind of a taboo thing to talk to strangers about, but like, there's someone who's like a professional person in this realm, and to have them really kind of, you know, pick apart my position and vice versa just sounds like an interesting thing to do, whether or not the cameras are rolling. And so that was sort of my initial motivation.
And do you feel you got what you expected there out of it just before we
No, because yeah, so Cade. So as Cade mentioned yesterday, like when they interview you for these videos, they do kind of standard like reality TV casting stuff. I've gone through other like TV casting before. And even though it's a YouTube show, it's basically just TV casting where it's like, oh, okay, I have a casting producer talk to you, get a kind of a sense of how you might be on camera, and then pass that along to a producer. And so the way you do that for Jubilee is you just ask like kind of basic, like, how would you respond to this? And how would you respond to that? And Cade from that kind of picked up that it might be Peterson. And he told me, because me and Cade are friends. And then the more I learned about Peterson in the weeks coming up to the debate, I was like, this guy isn't even really religious. And so I was expecting it to be his coming out as religious, because it seemed like his personal brand was sort of going in that direction. And it was like, oh, he's going to finally, you know, plant a flag in like, oh, I am Christian.
I mean, just I mean, he's been wearing cherubim on his blazers for over a year now at this point.
Yeah.
That's a pretty bold statement, whatever that says.
Yeah. It's just so the one where he was there and he was just like not engaging, right? It's very frustrating for a lot of us. And I think, again, particularly for the people who had like flown themselves out, right? For me, it's a 30-minute drive. I can start my laundry and film a Jubilee video and then get back before the dryer's done. Like, it's not a big deal for me. But if you're like flying yourself across the country for this, you're booking a hotel, and then it's like, okay, great, we're here to debate Christians and Christian versus atheism, and it's like, well, what do you mean what? It's like, what the hell? Like, what are we doing?
What do you think just generally about the question choice that he went with? I mean, like, have you reflected on that at all?
Yeah, so I think that Jordan Peterson is, and I don't know if I'm using this exactly right, but is sort of approximately engaged in sort of like a Mott and Bailey argument. Because if you look at the press he has done for his latest book, he frames it as this slam dunk against atheism. He's like permanently destroying and refuting atheism. And then you listen to the book, and it's just kind of word games and like kind of reverse engineering like arguments that the Daily Wire would like him to make, and it's just weird. And so then when we're there, and he's like, well, there are these other ideas of God. I know from watching his interviews that his point is we're not really atheists. That's what I believe his point to be when he's saying these questions, or you can't. And so then he's there, and he's just like, it's just the prompt, and I just think it's this interesting thing to say. It's like, no, like there's an implicit thing here that you're refusing to acknowledge, which I guess is sort of on brand. And so, yeah, I felt like he was just being cagey and trying to make an argument without owning it.
Yeah, I feel at least in the way that those questions were often phrased, there's almost like a cheap kind of gotcha in there. Like, you claim to be an atheist, but you worship, or like, there's a apologist called Frank Chorek who's got a book called I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. And it's kind of like that sort of thing where it's like, hang on, what even is the joke supposed to be here? Like, is faith bad then? Like, or good? Or it's just like this always like, well, haha, they say it's bad, but they've got the bad thing, and jokes on them.
And that's kind of what I was, when me and Jordan were talking past each other, that's one reason why, because I was attacking his implicit argument and he was just playing dumb, in my opinion.
And I will talk about that, but just another thing on his general like demeanor, I guess, engaging, because he's quite, I mean, when he's challenged, he doesn't react well to that. I'll put it that way, and see what I mean. What is that like, being in the room with that? Is that very uncomfortable? Is it?
It was both. It was uncomfortable and off-putting. There were a lot of moments where, especially when like a camera wasn't trained on me, I would kind of turn to try to exchange glances with someone, almost to just kind of like verify what I'm feeling, like what? And I always found multiple people who were also looking to kind of exchange a look of just like what's going on. And then, with the Danny moment, Jordan basically, it seemed like Jordan was about ready to quit. Right. And then we had to consider, like, he didn't say that, but that, if he's like, I'm done with him, it's like, okay, like this guy's not having fun. And so it's like, that's another thing too, where it's like, are we going to get through the whole shoot? I don't know.
The thing is, there's a part of me that's almost sympathetic towards some of what he's saying there, like where, like in his mind, I think he wants the ideal to be like a collaborative discussion and not a debate. But I feel that there's got to be a bit of give in there, right? If that's the goal, you can't be just like, as soon as someone disagrees with you, like launching these copy kind of attacks. And
I mean, you saw him talking to Parker where he didn't literally say this, but I think the kind of underlying point he had to Parker was, why are you debating me? When Parker kind of brought up this thing, and he was like, oh, you're trying to back me into this corner and you're trying to play this game. And it's like, you're debating someone. And I think that, Jordan Peterson, I've been very charitable about like, well, he has people who sign him up for these things, and maybe he relies on them to like brief him on what he's going into, but he didn't seem to really understand what he had signed up for. And then it's almost as if he wanted to like change what it was to fit what he wanted it to be. Again, just reading between the lines of his reactions. And yeah, like it's, he has a podcast where he talks to people for hours a day, and they really handle him with kid gloves because they're either his friends or his fans, or they want to be invited back. And, he has that available to him. And if the Jordan Peterson camp, if the Jordan Peterson team, including Jordan Peterson, wants to go on this kind of blood sports debate show, and there's a bunch of episodes of it out that they can watch, I think somebody in that group needs to at some point figure out what it is and decide if they like that before they're there and before he's in the chair talking to us.
I also think it wouldn't, like, even with people like Danny, it probably wouldn't be so blood sports if he was just like chilled himself. Like there's a way of, it's like, just the way he's like intensely like scowling at people and that kind of stuff is definitely
he's like this.
Yeah, like
all
what
time.
You think, speak the truth, like like just chill out. And I think he tried to do that a little bit though, but it didn't really.
Well, I just met him where he was at. So like, so I started out with, I thought that his, it's like he's just gonna steer the conversation into a ditch. And if like Richard Dawkins or Alex O'Connor or Sam Harris can't steer it out of the ditch, who am I to think I can steer it out of the ditch? So I crammed my whole argument into my opening statement so that I could kind of just wander around with Peterson. And then I was, for the most part, wandering around with him. But then when I'd say like, wait, can we stay on topic? Or like, I don't get, he'd kind of jab at me in different ways or raise his voice at me. And then I just return fire, but proportionately, right? Like he called me, he was like, you just don't want to answer my question. And I was like, no, I just feel like you're throwing spaghetti at the wall. I wouldn't have said that if he hadn't said it first, but it's like, so yeah, I felt like I was just kind of just like holding my ground, but it wasn't my intention to get him all mad.
I think that's what's so like maybe dissonant for Peterson fans about maybe your interaction is that you definitely come across as someone who's trying to be very like kind almost in that interaction, but he's like, just
and that's very intentional. So like, I've kind of stumbled into my Jubilee strategy, but where it's at this point is basically 99% of the time when I'm talking to people in real life, if they think something that's like really crazy, I don't blame them for it, at least at the start, because I believe that there's a lot of like algorithms and crazy politicians and Fox News and like there's all these things that kind of warp people and mislead them. And if I believe in sort of the brainwashing machine and then I meet someone who's confused, like it seems kind of logically inconsistent and unfair to just write them off as like a stupid bad person. But when I'm on Jubilee talking to like Jordan Peterson, for example, my personal opinion is I'm speaking to somebody who operates the brainwashing machine. And so it's like, okay, you are the exception to my rule of charitability and sort of, being affable. But I don't think the audience will understand why I act mean if I act mean. And because you are the type of person I'm talking to every time on Jubilee, if all they see is the exception to the rule, they'll think the exception is the rule. So I kind of method act my way into, for the 2 hours I'm there on set, I'm convinced this is just some random person that I don't really know anything about. And that's like a cool, good guy. And it's a way for me to ironically or counterintuitively come off more as myself than I would if I weren't kind of doing that trick to make myself come off as myself. So yeah, I really, really, really tried hard to like, oh, we're all here to have fun. And this is a nice guy, and without conceding any arguments. That's the really important thing, right? Because you don't want to like have sort of a dumb way of doing that is just to like grant people their points, but while staying very firm, just being very nice and friendly. And I really try to do that a lot. Like it's one of the things I put the most effort into when I'm there.
So in terms of the discussion that you had with Peterson then, do you want to sort of recall what your main sort of like challenge to him was? And then maybe even like how you've reflected, like what would you have stated that slightly differently in retrospect? Do you think there's anything about that where maybe it like was just a little bit off what you wanted to communicate because then it allowed him?
Yeah, I definitely could have just said he was equivocating instead of, I did this like 2-minute thing at the start of like polysemy and the Mona Lisa. Part of that it was deliberately meandering because I didn't want him to pick up on where I was going. Because one thing I noticed from my cats are fighting in the background. If you hear that, sorry everyone. One thing I picked up on from the Michael Knowles Surrounded was the second he sensed where I was going, he'd derail me before I got there. And so with Jordan, I wanted to kind of open with like this weird thing where he'd be like, "What?" And then, you know, by the time he realized where I was going, it was kind of too late. And so, yeah, I definitely could have just said, you know, you're equivocating. Generally, I am pretty. I think I also could have done a better job of separating out and defining his implicit and explicit argument. So I was sort of attacking his implicit argument without explicitly framing it. But generally, yeah, my argument against Peterson was just, it was a critique of how he uses language, which is that he acts as if when we are saying something he doesn't like us to be saying, in those instances only, we have to come up with some sort of like super statement where in every sense of every word in the statement, we still stand behind the statement. But then when he is talking about something he dislikes, like, you know, gay pride, for example, then he'll just say, well, pride means this, and this is what it means. And if you want to use it in some other sense of the word, well, that's your fault. You know, this is what the word means to me, and you must conform to how the word is defined in my brain. But then when we're like, hey, do you get what we mean here? He just, you know, he uses this sort of like conversational escape pod of, you know, what is what?
Yeah,
it's just annoying. And that was kind of my critique of him. It wasn't even really like, it didn't even really get into like any theological arguments. It was just like, you know what we mean. Mm-hmm. And you're making pretend you don't know what we mean. And you're making pretend that, you know, well, you know, I worship my favorite sports team because I watch the game every night, thus I'm religious, is like this ridiculous argument. That was kind of my point. And I'm happy with how it went. I definitely could have refined it.
So there's this argument, like talking about the polysemy of the word worship, but it sounds like your critique is really on like almost the hypocrisy of trying to say that there are these really strict senses of words that are always used univocally, and you know, so he's trying to hold people to those to account in that way. But then as soon as there's any pushback on him, it's, well, what does anything mean?
Yeah. And the problem is, if I had opened calling it bad faith, I think that would have kind of cast a gauntlet down. But right. There's no way to talk. Let me put it this way. I don't know how to explain that critique in a way that doesn't implicitly communicate that it's bad faith, without sounding really condescending.
Yeah,
because it's like, oh, if I make pretend that you don't understand this, then I have to explain, like, well, when we use a word, we use it in one way at a time,
mm-hmm.
right? Like the example I used of, moving emotionally versus moving physically, that's from his newest book. In the opening pages of his newest book, he says, like God moved along the face of the waters or whatever it is. And like, it's physically moving and emotionally moving. And so it's like, yeah, so that was the problem, where it's like, I either sound like I'm talking to a child, or mm-hmm. I say, you're obviously not a child.
Yeah.
You understand. And I didn't know what like the third option would be.
So maybe even a slightly, I mean, we can continue to sort of talk about the argument and stuff, but I don't know if you've a movement I am not anymore a part of or fan of, but has some good things. I don't know if you know of the street epistemology movement.
No, what's that?
So it was an attempt at having some techniques for talking about people's sort of deeply held beliefs. Mm-hmm. The problem is that the guy who came up with it has turned out to be like this crazy sort of crypto fascist guy who's associated mm-hmm. with Vic Orban, takes money off Chris Rufo, complains about Claudine Gay in the universities and hates trans people. But putting that stuff aside, there is some. So he came up with the term street epistemology, but it became a movement that's its own thing, and this is where a lot of conversational techniques come from. And within that, there's some things that I think can be helpful, right? So one of them is like to initially just always try and make sure you build some like rapport with someone before you get into any of these hard beliefs. So
yeah,
there's like a joke that will be common between you or something. If you can like do that, get them laughing on your side, then that's like a great point as a starter, because then it's just much harder for them to be like mad at you afterwards.
Yeah. No, I agree. And I made him laugh when I ran to the chair and went, ha, he laughed. And then when I opened, I was like, I'm familiar with what you've said about this, and it's really interesting. And that was an attempt to sort of establish rapport.
Right. And then the other thing that has at least I found very helpful is sometimes if you challenge someone's belief sort of directly, right, then it gets very combative. But if you flip it around and frame it as a question, and you can say like, oh, so like, what do you think about this then? How would you respond if you found out this was wrong or something? Like
right.
Very
good point.
Hypothetical. It takes it, instead of it then feeling like it's challenging you, instead it feels like the belief is on a shelf sort of thing, and you can talk about
I love that. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. It reminds me of something I've read about called permission structures. Are you familiar with that?
Oh, no. Yeah.
So permission structures, it was a term popularized by a few people in the Obama administration. The idea is basically that people are going to have a sort of emotional barrier to accepting a new belief if accepting the new belief requires accepting a negative personal characterization. And so you kind of give people, you could either view it as an off-ramp from what they think or an on-ramp to what you want them to think. That kind of preserves their dignity. So like if somebody is fallen, if your grandma fell for like an AI thing on Facebook, and you're like, that's obviously an AI thing and that's ridiculous, and who would even fall for that? Well, then now she has to accept this characterization of her that's very negative. But if you say, hey, I am tricked by these things all the time, and they're getting so much harder to even spot, and just recently someone taught me how to spot these, and here's what they showed me. Now it's like you're giving them sort of a narrative that allows them to accept the new belief while keeping their self-esteem intact. And that's the sort of idea of doing that like Socratically to kind of guide them. It seems sort of in that ballpark, and I like that.
Yeah. No, I like that as well, because this is my personal view, is that I don't have a whole ton of evidence sort of like looking at all the different types of irrational belief systems, whatever. But my personal view is that a big driver behind this stuff is like cognitive dissonance. So just people find it like, when they're confronted with evidence that goes against something that they strongly believe, the feeling is like, well, either I'm an idiot for believing that and I'm very stupid, or I'm right, and maybe I need to believe something that is a little bit, maybe I need to believe in the flat earth to be right, but that feels nicer than being stupid.
No, really. I'm 30, and since I think I was maybe 13 years old, I've volunteered at science museums. Usually about once a week I'm volunteering somewhere, and I've done a lot of like public educational work, and people who know a lot and who are very smart about one thing can be surprisingly clueless, and when it comes to like every other slice of the pie of things to know, right? Like I've talked to people who are when I lived near San Francisco. I now live in the Los Angeles area. When I lived in the San Francisco area, I talked to people who were like senior people at like Apple, for example, very smart. They came to the science museum and they were like, "Oh, are starfish alive? I always thought they were just like rocks." And it's like that's a very basic thing. And then if you go like, oh yeah, it's so I agree, and it's like you would think that, because where's the mouth, where's the eyes, you've never seen them moving. It makes perfect sense that you would think that. And so I have a lot of experience being very kind of loving and respectful when people don't know something. And then I might see that this has never happened, but like I could then maybe next week my car breaks down, I don't know how to fix it, and maybe that person works at AutoZone and can explain what my radiator is, right? So it's like, yeah, I think we all know different stuff. And I think that it's really important to, if you want to change someone's mind, to approach them respectfully so you can help guide them through that. Because I think people have a deep set insecurity about being called stupid. I think there's this kind of, they fear that people will think they are dumb if they admit that they were wrong about something.
Yeah, and I think that drives like so much of the toxic aspects of debate as well, because it all becomes about the con man, the confidence like angle, right? And even when if you know you're wrong or you've been got or whatever, it's like don't show weakness, and all these dynamics.
That's another thing where my museum, like my kind of informal education background, really instructs me. I've almost called it figuratively like an accent that I bring in to how I talk to people, which is when you are working at like a nonprofit, like scientific institution, at least one worth its salt, like you get a lot of training on you don't want to say things that you don't know to be true. And so you might ask me a question, like here's a basic question. My cat in the frame behind me is orange. A starfish is orange. Is the same thing that makes a starfish orange what makes my cat orange? And if I just say, yeah, well, I don't know that. And now I might have misinformed you as a representative of a scientific institution. And if I just say no, then I've given you a nothing answer. And if I say, hey, I don't know the answer to that, but I love the question. And, there's kind of, we could look at this through the lens of convergent evolution, where it may be the fact that, cats and sea stars like independently converged on this trait that, gives them this orange color. Or, maybe this could be a shared, like dietary component that shows up in their coloration. Like, did you know, for example, that, sea otters, if they eat enough sea urchins, they actually dyes their bones purple. So sometimes the color in an animal can be, from its food even. So I actually would love to find that out myself, because it could be so many interesting things. I'm giving you a satisfying answer, but I'm making it very clear exactly how confident I am in the answer. So I have the opposite instinct of the sort of like debate bro, be super confident. It's incredibly important to me that I'm very clear about exactly how authoritative anything I say is.
Yeah, no, I like that a lot. It's like so there's the angle then, I think, almost like the therapy side, right? With some people, is like to make them feel psychologically safe. And then it's like, it sounds so bad, but it's like training people to feel comfortable saying, I don't know sometimes, it's like, what's best? A true explanation, a false explanation, or just, I'm not certain. Like, if you were to order those, how would you put them? And, I think sometimes people reflexively will go like, well, true explanation is best. And then I think people often, they feel that just saying I don't know is better than a false explanation, but they'll be like, no, my need is to want to just immediately say something right about that thing, to like, and it's like, well, what that's it worse than saying I don't know. Maybe we just go with I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big fan of I don't know, but I think there's a constructive form of I don't know, right? It's not just like in the example where I said, my cat, who's once again in frame, is my cat orange for the same reason a sea star is orange. The first thing I said was, I don't know.
Yeah.
Then I gave you like 3 minutes of interesting stuff, right? Yeah. And so I think there can be an I don't know that is still productive and still communicates something. And yeah, I mean, and that's another thing where honestly, back to your earlier question about my interest in like theology, Cade has walked me through some of the kind of like apologetics kind of like flowcharts. And I always stop at the first step where they're like, we don't know the answer to this, thus it must be God. And it's like, well, no, we just don't know the answer. I'm comfortable with I don't know to the point where I can be sort of a stick in the mud to, certain sort of, arguments. But yeah, I think the best thing is productive honesty. I know that's not really picking an option, but like be honest about what, be honest about if you are super confident, say that, but don't lie. And you can find a way. You can. Sorry, I have really bad ADHD.
No, don't worry. You've got to get the cat.
All right. This is my kitty cat. Yeah, I think I don't know if that answers your question. I'm not sure if I fully maybe misunderstood it, but yeah, I think you can find a way to work in something productive and interesting while still being very honest about your level of knowledge.
I would say my view there, I get what you're saying, and I think it's so context dependent. Like in the problem with these sorts of debates, right? Say if someone's like Peterson, is that with Peterson's communication style, he loves to, or even like someone like Jay Dyer, they love to sort of like story tell, or kind of like even like a Trump is like this, where you can forget what the point even was, because they go on some like sort of like narrative of just like name dropping and random historical events, and you're like, hang on, like what we
right.
This isn't to disparage everything you said there at all. Like I think you're right, but it's the degree of relevance of that information that's confidential, right?
And I would grant, if Peterson would grant that in the way that is meaningful and in the way that is relevant to the fault lines of this sort of general societal debate about religion, I am an atheist and I'm not religious, I would then be happy to follow him down that path of like, well, if you play pickleball, you play it every day, you show up somewhere, other people are there. In a way, that's sort of a ritual. So in a way, like your religion is pickleball. It's like, okay, in a way is doing a lot of work there, but fine. And I do think that Peterson is correct in that, the Bible is a very interesting sort of multi-genre document that has, impacted the world in a lot of ways and is worth looking at as like a book. But I think that, if you flip it, we're like, if I told Jordan Peterson, or if I told maybe, because I don't know what Jordan Peterson is, but if I told like a Christian, like, you're actually an atheist. And they said, what? And I said, well, to me, an atheist is somebody who doesn't accept dogma, who decides for themselves what they think, who cares about science and reason, and thus you're an atheist. And then that person was like, okay, I get how you're saying it in that way, but like first, like, no, I'm a Christian. That is what I am. And I'm telling you I'm a Christian. And I'm like, well, see, the thing is you're just not thoughtful. And you want to talk about common parlance. I don't care about common parlance. I'm trying to get to something deeper and more fundamental. And so, you are really an atheist. And then you look me up on YouTube and you see a video of me going, I have this slam dunk against Christians. They're not really Christians. They're atheists. And then I'm like, no, I'm just, the prompt was, in this way, you're an atheist. Like it just seems obnoxious and disingenuous and willfully obtuse. And so, yeah, I think if Jordan was willing to concede that, then I would be more willing to talk to him about these kind of more esoteric framings of basic terms.
Yes. So in what you said there was like an echo of one of his objections to you, right? That I don't care about common parlance thing.
Yeah.
I mean, something about that is very weird, right? Because worship isn't like a technical term of a science or of, even terms that say psychology has operationalized, like intelligence or something. It's not clear that they do capture like what most people mean by intelligence. And so, you could have a discussion about a technical use of a word, but if there is a common use of a word like worship, then it seems that that's going to be the more relevant sense to sort of like you. And then you can say, now in this technical sense, I think you worship something. I don't know what you.
Yeah, I think that, and again, like I'm no Jordan Peterson, right? I've never been a professor. I haven't written a bunch of books or done a bunch of interviews. I have like a crumb of the experience he has in terms of just hours logged in communicating with the general public. But in my personal experience communicating with the general public, you first have to walk over to where someone else is and then be their partner in walking them to a new place. And I think that if you refuse to at least initially engage in common parlance, you are refusing to be understood. It's so I don't, and that's sort of a critique of Peterson broadly, is like a lot of people accuse him of not wanting to be understood, where a lot of people say, well, he just kind of wants his audience to think he sounds smart and not really get it. Because if they really got what he was saying, they would find it kind of boring or annoying and so, yeah, I think that you can go to these other places, but first you have to meet people where they're at. And we weren't having like an upper level, like exhibition. Like we weren't doing like an exhibition for like an upper level college class. This is a Jubilee video. It's for a general audience and it's framed a certain way. And so, you can't, like, I think he's a little bit stubborn, to put it. That's the most terrible thing I could say, because it's not as communication requires shared understanding of terms.
Yeah. And I mean, we could talk as well about whether even some of the technical senses of these words, whether they do make sense. But there's a Nietzsche quote, one of Peterson's favorite scholars, says, they muddy the waters so they seem deep, right? And I think that so
well, I said that with the semantic fog.
Yes,
that's following him around now. It's great.
I've seen people using that. Do you want to talk about what you mean by that?
Yeah, so I once Cade guessed that it was Peterson and tipped me off. And to be clear, Cade was not tipped off by Jubilee. Cade is just very clever. But after Cade tipped me off, I spent a lot of time trying to boil down what bothers me about Peterson. And I got a few kind of things from that I just sort of put in my back pocket. And one of them was, I feel like he retreats into a semantic fog. And what I meant by that was, I was imagining like a stage musician wants to like disappear. I'm sorry, a stage magician, not musician. A stage magician wants to disappear, and they're like, "Whoo!" And like this big cloud, and it's like it feels like that's what he does, where he selectively feigns ignorance about like context clues. And then it's this like Russian nesting doll of, well, what do you mean by true? I mean, I believe it. What do you mean by believe? What do you mean by reality? What do you mean? And it's like, it's this way for him to just like, pretty soon it's like, you can't even see him anymore. There's just all this kind of, and it's like Homer Simpson disappearing into the bush. Have you seen that meme?
Yeah.
It just feels like that's what he does. And so I had that in my back pocket, and I was like, I want to say this at some point. And then it ended up being the last thing I said. And then he was like, I'm not retreating. I'm advancing. You're retreating. And it was just the perfect way to end it. And yeah, it's again, it to an extent, it's important because it's important for us to know what other people mean. But it's also important for us to be honest once the other person has accomplished that goal of communicating what they mean. And I think the latter is the problem with Jordan. And yeah, I've seen it, like, and some of my friends have sent me stuff where like people are using it and not referencing me or the debate. It's just become part of the like phrase book that people draw from, which I love. Like people accuse Jordan Peterson of word salad. No one says like, as so-and-so famously said. It's just a thing people say now. And that is my hope for semantic fog. I hope it just becomes the thing people say about Peterson.
Well, I like it. I will say I've caught strays from this though already, because I'm someone who I like to pay attention to language and questions people ask about words, particularly in philosophy, right? Like my view is that a lot of philosophical questions kind of arise out of sort of malformed questions that people read off of grammatical form of words. So like, if there's a noun, for example, people will frequently think of nouns as like referring to sort of like spatial objects. And so they will take that noun and ask questions about it that can be very bizarre. And then you get these kind of like questions that might have a ring to them that sound. So the point is anyway, like, I'm someone who's very prone to asking these questions about what people mean. Yeah. But then I'm completely on board with your challenging Peterson. I think he is doing it in a sort of like an illegitimate way. But I've caught some strays from your semantic fog.
Yeah. Well, so people are accusing you of semantic fog? Is that what you're saying?
Me of semantic fog. Like,
I'm sorry. Yeah. Well, I think a lot of it is like, what is the intention and what is the result? Right? If your intention is to, in good faith, clarify, and the result is that it lets you progress the conversation forward in a way that's more productive and where you are more able to address what the person is saying, right? I think that it's not just asking what do you mean in a vacuum. It's why are you asking it and what is the result of you asking it? Like one thing I said to Jordan that didn't make the final cut was in my as a kind of example of my critique of him. This is another one of my little prepared lines. I was like, Jordan, when I ask you where the bathroom is, you don't say North America. Yeah. Like, you know what I mean. And if you do this sort of like filibustering of, well, in what geographically, or, in what sense, because blah, blah, blah. It's like you're doing this to like muddy the waters. And I do think, clarifying questions are important and good. And I think it's people who would, deploy that semantic fog accusation against somebody who is, in good faith clarifying in the way that you described, maybe they don't entirely understand what I meant or how it applies to Peterson.
Yeah, it's very like context dependent, I think, because even on the other side of that, like the definite. So I think what you've described with people like retreating into this semantic fog and saying like, oh, who even knows? So they kind of can't be nailed down. That so they're kind of like, or like whack-a-mole kind of thing. That's a strategy people engage in. But the other side of the coin is people offering like definitions that are clear. I think this is a whole bunch of problems in debates where people start talking about like definitions of words. So in the trans debate, right? The trans debate, and I hate that because it's just it's like some sport or something that is completely disconnected from sensible discussion of policy or anything like that. But in the trans debate, it's like, well, what is a woman, right? And it's like, well, I've got a 3-word answer. What's your 3-word answer? As if sort of like the zinginess of a clear definition, it means that therefore your position's right or something.
Right. I mean, like as if I said, like, I agree what you mean. I agree with you. That's a really interesting connection. I think that there's sort of a dishonesty in both Peterson saying like, well, what do you mean is, and then an anti-trans person making pretend that they like before they say that woman over there, they like steal like a little bit of their blood and get it tested for chromosomes. It's like in both cases, you guys are being a little bit disingenuous here, right? Like with the trans debate, like the what is a woman question is it's like you can offer an answer that sounds concise, but then what if you actually look at how those people functionally interact with the world and society, they are clearly not abiding by that definition when they are determining in sort of casual interactions with the world who is a man and who is a woman, right? Yeah. So I think I definitely think that there is not a sort of intrinsic value in concision or in, a lot. And I don't think there's like a good intrinsic issue in asking for clarification. It's just what is your intent, and then what is the result. I think those are the kind of fault. Those are kind of where those are the just kind of categorically defining things for me, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Because the other side of this that I see a lot in like relevant political discussions too is terms like racism, Islamophobia, and fascism as well, where if someone uses those terms, and this is actually like an Andrew Wilson trick, is like do you even know what racism is? Do you even know what is like? And it's like, because these concepts require more than 4 words to unpack. It's like I couldn't possibly be being racist because it's difficult for them to describe what they even mean by racism.
And I think this speaks to the damage that Peterson does in a way, where it's like he is viewed as this public intellectual, super smart guy. And then he is deploying this in bad faith. And then that makes it more challenging for people to deploy it in good faith.
Yeah. And it's even interesting too, where, like his kind of criticisms of things like postmodernism, where, his criticism will often be like, like they're straightforward reality deniers who pay attention to complexity in language and stuff. But then when it, all of a sudden, when it comes to theological topics, right, it's all, who knows what these things mean?
It's very, it's silly and it's inconsistent. And I think this is where, I think I mentioned this in your chat yesterday, but I think that this debate was almost like Joe Biden's last presidential debate, where if you were like following it and paying attention and kind of, you know, watching the hour-long analysis or whatever, you know, you could pick up on it. But then it's like, okay, Joe Biden has 2 minutes to answer a question, and we all just watched him answer it, and like, what's going on? And I think, you know, there are people who have always hated Peterson and always said these things about him. But I think for the people who are kind of lower information, this was the first time where he was sort of forced into a format where he can't hide in the fact that it's a 3-hour-long video. Mm-hmm. And you just very clearly and immediately see what he's doing.
Yeah. Danny almost even used the same line, right? With the, I don't think he knows where he is right now.
Yeah, I don't think he did, and that's what's so funny. Yeah, and it's like I've said that too. When people talk to us, I was like, I know Danny said it in like a snarky way, but like I really don't think he knew where he was. Like I don't. He's just like, I think people were just like, okay, you're doing this on Saturday. Right. Like my husband loves planning stuff, and I'm very spontaneous. So sometimes he'll be like, hey, like when we're on a trip or something, I won't ask him what we're doing on the trip because I love to be surprised. Mm-hmm. And then like we'll wake up one morning and I'll be like, oh, we're going to this museum. And I'm like, okay. I just kind of follow him there. And it's like someone did that to Jordan. Or it's like, okay, we're going to this warehouse in like LA, and like you're gonna talk to people. Okay.
Yeah. So I wonder then, just on Peterson's own terms for his theory, like his kind of technical use of the word worship, have you got to the bottom of that? Like, do you have thoughts on what he is meaning there, and your kind of like views of that?
Yeah. So I think that it is an interesting, irrelevant discussion. And I'm a big fan of those. Like right now, I have a paper I co-authored that's currently in revision, which just means we got the reviewer comments back on it, and we're just kind of incorporating them, where we are looking at plants growing as weeds up in trees in Los Angeles. And you can make an argument that in some way it's an interesting sort of, you know, it's a tile in the mosaic of scientific understanding. But like, is it super important or relevant? Like, no, probably not, right? So I'm one, all that to say, to frame myself as somebody who really loves these sort of like academic rabbit hole explorations of things that aren't like directly relevant to big questions. And so I think that it's a very fun and interesting and thought-provoking exercise to imagine how we sort of figuratively engage in kind of, you know, religion or worship, right? With like air quotes. But I think that he kind of wants to have his cake and eat it too, in that he wants to heavily imply that it's this very significant thing that rebukes in a large group of people who state that they don't believe in, you know, kind of supernatural religious claims. And then when you kind of corner him on it, he's just like, oh, no, I just think you might find it interesting that as Isaiah said this, and I just think it's interesting. And it's like, just bro, own what you're trying to do. So yeah, my issue is not in a vacuum, this idea. I think it's an interesting idea. My issue is I think he's deploying it in this really like weaselly way, and that's my problem. But no, the thing itself, yeah, it's one. There's a lot of things Jordan Peterson has said that I really don't like. Mm-hmm. I don't like him on climate change. I don't like him on trans issues, particularly.
You're ecology, right? Just to clarify, I got that right.
Yeah. So I dropped out of college, worked in sales for a long time, and then I started doing scientific research with a friend of mine who's a professor at UCLA. Then I presented the research at conferences, and people were like, "Who's your graduate advisor?" And I was like, "What?" And then I was like, "Oh, maybe I should finish my degree." And so I have like maybe 6 or 8 months left on it. And then I also just care deeply about like trans stuff as well. I'm close with people who work in that field. I have trans friends. I'm gay, so I'm part of the LGBT community. So yeah, climate change and trans stuff are where Peterson really bothers me, at least to the extent of, you know, of what I'm aware of Peterson. This idea that like, you know, this kind of like religion word games thing, it could be fun if he presented it honestly.
So I do have issues with his like more technical understanding of this, which, I mean, even part of my issues are that it isn't like good psychology. So he's got some of this from his friend John Vervaeke, right, who taught at Uni of Toronto, or teaches, I think, still. And he's got this problem he's got a theory he calls relevance realization, right? And there is a genuine problem here in psychology of, basically understanding like goals and motivation. Like how do people...
Right.
Like what's your theory of what goes on when people say choose to focus on one thing? You said you've got ADHD, so this is probably something you might be interested in yourself. But John Vervaeke's come up with this theory of relevance realization, and even his framing of the problem is like incredibly bizarre to me. Like he'll often say these words. So I've got a background in software engineering. I work as a software engineer, and he'll say stuff like, oh, well, it's a combinatorially explosive problem or whatever. I'll be like, what problem? Like, what algorithm have you got that is supposed to define goal orientation that is, O of n factorial? Like, they just say these words to kind of...
Yeah, it sounds smart. Dude, I hate that whenever I'm watching a lot of responses to, like, I don't know very much about computer science. I took the free Harvard CS50 class during lockdowns, and I learned about like Boolean expressions, but I know a decent amount of about evolution and stuff.
Yeah.
And when I hear these people make these, like, for example, like social Darwinism appeals, it's like, you don't know what you're talking about, and it's maddening. It's like, and you're presenting it in this way where it has this air of like intellectualism, and it's like, no. So I relate to that core frustration when somebody is deploying something outside of their field of expertise in a very stupid way, and then their audience doesn't know.
And that's kind of the problem with so many of Peterson's views. I mean, most of his research is in addiction, right? So all of like a lot of the theology stuff, even the psychology stuff that he speaks on, is often either like very outdated or sort of like almost like Chinese whispers. Like he'll have heard it off of someone, say, on the Daily Wire, who's like maybe a fringe academic anyway, and then he's kind of like rehashing it, but in a way. And that's sort of a bit of a frustrating aspect of his kind of theories here.
Well, yeah, and also, I've rubbed shoulders with, academics. You sound like, if you're not an academic, then at minimum you've also rubbed shoulders with academics. And like, there's this thing that happens where somebody like gets a PhD or whatever, right? And they kind of start studying, and they become very aware of the fact that within their narrow field of expertise, the average person does not even know how much they do not know about their field of expertise. It's just like, there's just like, oh, you're on a different planet than me. And then I feel like there's sort of two ways you can use that understanding or that awareness. One is, the average person knows almost nothing about like clinical psychology. Maybe I am similarly clueless about like theology. And when I kind of, opine about theology, and I make these sort of like half-baked points, maybe I sound the same way that people sound to me when they make like a half-baked point about like Jungian stuff or whatever Peterson is an expert on, right? Or you can do this other thing where you're like, the average person who's not an expert on my subject matter can't even begin to understand how much they don't understand, but I'm just going to sort of like hobby and free time my way into like opining on all these other things and even disagreeing with professional consensus. And I find the latter it's indicative of kind of hubris and a lack of self-awareness, and it's annoying. And so, I think that, whenever somebody who's a subject matter expert in one thing decides that they can just become a subject matter expert in another thing, and that if the majority of subject matter experts disagree with them, they just aren't, they just don't have the special secret genius, right? It's obnoxious,
especially without doing like any of the legwork to show that you even understand what it is you're disagreeing with. Like that sort of is so.
One thing I've landed on because the problem with the Jubilee debates, or any debate, is in real life, if someone said something that sounded dumb, you can kind of pause and look it up, and right. But when you're having a live debate, you can't. And a lot of times people will deploy these like, well, all of the major medical associations believe this, but I saw this guy on the Joe Rogan podcast who talked about this study. And one thing I've kind of landed on as a way to kind of deflect that in a way that I think is very fair is to say, so maybe deflect's the wrong word, but a way to kind of address that is you don't have special secret information, right? Like there is not whatever it is, if it's like some sort of, paper about psychology or some sort of thing that a doctor said or a study or whatever, there is nothing that you, person who Googled this a lot, is going to find out about that like the experts are unaware of. And so why, so like whatever it is, right? Like when I was talking to Michael Knowles, he was like, there's this one study that said that like gay parenting is bad. And it's like, okay, do you think that all the major medical associations are unaware of this? Do you think this study was just sent to you personally, right? Is there anything, what is the Venn diagram overlap of stuff you can find on YouTube about this and stuff that like the foremost experts are unaware? It's these circles are not overlapping.
Yeah. I always, there's always that one study with like the trans thing as well, where it was like someone like triple counted like medals that trans athletes won. Like validate. Like it's just one crazy.
Yeah. Well, here's a great example in that domain. So there was a study that found that, but I know that people like censor themselves in things where they say like, I don't like, should I do that here?
That's all right. Don't worry.
I can just use it. Okay. So there was a study that found that suicide rates or suicidal ideation, one of the two, goes up after gender affirming surgery, and that's cited a lot to say what you're saying, it helps their mental health, but it makes suicidality go up after any major surgery. You have a thing that hurts, you can't move around a lot, it's depressing. There is a background rate of an increase in psychological distress that happens after any major surgery. And the background rate after gender affirming surgery, the rate of those issues after gender affirming surgery in the short term matches the background rate.
Right.
And then long term, it actually there's a significant decrease in like suicidal ideation, psychological distress. And this paper was presented, but the people who wrote this paper, their point was, hey, look, this, the trans people who get gender affirming surgery are not immune when it comes to this common problem, and let's figure out how to like better support them, and like what are some interventions we can use. It was just, and then it's cited by these people to say that we should reduce access to this care. And that's the sort of thing where, again, it's like, the American Medical Association, the American Psychiatric Association, the American Academy, blah blah blah. I have my own issues with like the cast review and all that, but like broadly speaking, if there's a professional consensus on a topic, and then there's like a study, the professionals know about the study.
Yeah. I do. I mean, I agree. I can see where some of the worries come from, just because, I mean, like look, for example, like, homosexuality in the DSM, right? Like, you've got to have fallibility built into your understanding. But I get what you're saying. It's like, the problem is, I think that so many of these sort of like heterodox thinkers, they just want to undermine people's trust in all sort of like epistemic authorities.
Epistemic poisoning.
And they just want to set their like podcast up as like your new source of truth and everything. And it's just
I've been listening to this audiobook, the audiobook version of How Fascism Works by Jason Stanley. He's an authority on like fascism.
Professor of have you seen there's a clip on a channel called Filenshad that's like him going, I'm the Jacob Yorovsky Professor of Philosophy at New York, wherever university. It's very funny.
And he actually made headlines recently because he took a position in Canada, and it was headlines where fascism expert decides it's time to leave US. But this book is really interesting, and one thing he talks about RT, the Russian state-funded propaganda media organization. And he says that the Russian propagandists, so I guess their term for it is political technologists, came up with this idea that we are going to have every conceivable opinion. We're going to have neo-Nazis, we're going to have people on the far left, we're going to have everyone. And then it's going to create this cacophony where it destabilizes our collective understanding of reality. And it was kind of Stanley brought this up as sort of a rebuke to the marketplace of ideas will naturally precipitate the truth. And it's like, that's only true if we have a shared set of, presuppositions about the world. And what struck me was that Stanley was not just describing RT, he was describing literally the entire internet. It's and to be clear, I'm very pragmatic, and I think if we say, well, the internet is like irresponsible media, let's just turn our phones off. I don't think that helps. I think we have to find a way to break into the algorithmic pipelines, right? And or even just like play defense when people are trying to, make these stupid arguments. So I'm not arguing that like we disengage, but I just think it speaks to what you're describing about how it's like this kind of epistemic poisoning.
Yeah, no, completely agree with that. Actually, I think I saw you maybe mention this in one of your shorts or something recently.
Yeah.
And I was like, this is a point that there's a documentary maker I love, Adam Curtis, and he has a documentary called Hypernormalization, where he mentions in that this guy who came up with this for Putin, who was a theater producer actually called Vladislav Surkov.
Mm-hmm.
And it was this idea of like turning.
I'm going to write that down, by the way, if you see my
phone.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah, it's called Hypernormalization, the documentary. Absolutely love it. So Vladislav Surkov had his background in theater, and he was like, oh yeah, what we can do is we can kind of like run politics like theater. And what we will do is we'll basically like fund both sides of any debate. And what that does is it just completely undermines the legitimacy of everyone, because no one's going to know if they're opposing because they're funded by us or because it's real, and it just creates this state of like almost cynicism that everyone has then.
Yeah. I agree. And by the way, am I remembering this correctly? I remember I saw some sort of viral post that I think said the term hypernormalization or something similar. And it was with respect to this idea that things are going very badly, or the sense that things are going very badly, but society is sort of passively gaslighting you against acknowledging that. And it was, I think, with respect to kind of the last days of the Soviet Union or something.
Yes,
is that the same thing?
So this is Adam Curtis. He's got another documentary coming out soon. I'm looking forward to. But his last series was he went through the BBC archives, where the BBC have all this footage from the downfall of the Soviet Union. Right. And he just basically like pieced it all together into a story, but without any narrative this time. And it's I highly recommend watching it.
I want to, yeah. I love BBC stuff. Is it a BBC documentary, or is it just you use BBC footage?
It is. Like, he's always worked for the BBC, but you can get it on like a whole bunch of different places now because it's a few.
One of my favorite documentaries I ever saw, because again, as in like an ADHD guy. And by the way, I find it annoying when people with like ADHD, they'll go on like TikTok and they'll be like, I don't like using a big spoon with my yogurt. I have ADHD. It's like I always kind of
clothes haven't been washed in a month. But
I always hear like an echo of that, and then I kind of self-conscious whenever I bring up my own ADHD. But I have trouble reading like print books, and so I'm a really big like audiobook guy, a really big documentary guy, because I can like multitask. That's also, by the way, why I initially dropped out of college, because I couldn't sit still in a lecture hall for 2 hours. I'm now post-COVID, you can do a biology degree from a reputable university through online lectures. And so I listen to the lectures while doing stuff. But anyway, so there's this documentary. It was like a 4-hour documentary. I'm trying to remember the name, but it was about the rise of propaganda. And there was this guy, was it Edward Bernays or something?
I'm thinking this could be an Adam Curtis documentary. Is it Century of Self?
Yeah. That is my favorite. I watched that when I was a teenager, and it just fundamentally shaped how I view the world in a way that few things have. That was a really impactful documentary for me. So I'm excited to watch more of his stuff.
There's a YouTube playlist actually someone's put together of like all Adam Curtis documentaries. So if you find that,
perfect.
There's one that I want to watch that I came across in that playlist of how America kind of like displaced the British Empire. So like in World War One, basically the American plan was like, well, Britain needs a lot of help, right, financially and stuff.
Yeah.
Took all our gold and like kind of like, all the places where we've got again, I'm not saying our empire was like a great thing or anything, but it's just like very interesting how suddenly like the power of the world just shifted, and then like America.
as an American, I think I'm in a bit of a glass house right now in terms of criticizing other countries. So, you know.
Well, this is the interesting thing about the Russia one is there are a lot of parallels between, I don't know, just the kind of like general sense of cynicism, the loss of trust in any kind of authorities and power, the degeneration towards just power being the only force that anyone respects after your institutions and things fall apart. Like a lot of those kinds of things definitely have like echoes, I think, in what you can kind of see in the US, unfortunately.
I completely agree. Yeah, no, that sort of hyper normalization thing, as contextual, you know, and with respect to what I mentioned about like the kind of viral thing about, it feels like this is not sustainable, but everyone's acting like it is. I've had that feeling my whole life. Right. Because I have felt like growing up in the United States, like there's just this sort of thought stopping like thing, like tautological, like, well, America's different because America's different. It's like, well, like look at how in all these other places, you know, good things and bad things, right? Like, you know, in other places, like they have like better gun control. Or, in other places, you know, there have been like coups and like all these things, but like, why not here? Well, because we're America. It's just sort of like it's like this jingoistic like proclamation, and it's just I was always just like, but like, how, I don't get it. But then everything around me, right, explicitly and then sort of just implicitly, there's sort of like the inculcation of just, you know, like just kind of cultural norms and media and everything. And it's just like, oh no, we're always going to be fine. And no one can explain why, but it's true.
Well, yeah, we'll see where it goes. I mean, look, maybe your saving grace will be weirdly the horrible guy who's even partly responsible, Musk falling out with, you know, maybe that.
Oh yeah. I feel like, have you seen the movie Alien vs. Predator?
Right. Yeah.
I feel like that's what we're watching, where it's like, whoever wins, we lose. but is still, no, yeah, that's, I mean, yeah, no, man, honestly, like if it came down to it, and this is like very unlikely, but if it did come down to the point where like I felt like unsafe living in this country, me and, you know, my loved ones have the ability to move somewhere else. Right. Yeah. But I, you know, hopefully it doesn't get there. But well, I'm of the opinion that it could.
Of all the places to be, California is probably one of the best, because
that's the thing.
Yeah.
I'm anticipating primarily just sort of a balkanization.
Yeah, you'll be the new United States of America.
yeah, and a lot of this, it's sad to say, but a lot of this has to do with how, you know, in terms of like how persecutable are you? Right? I don't know if that's a word, but
I know,
you know, how many boxes are checked in terms of who they're going after. Where are you geographically, and then where are you socioeconomically?
Yeah.
And it right now, the combination of those factors for me is like, I'm on a hill and there's a tsunami, and I'm like, okay, I think I'm high enough on this hill, you know. And I'm that's not to say I'm just kind of like, okay, right? Like I'm not justifying it. But I'm just being honest. Louis C.K. had a great point. I'm no longer a Louis C.K. fan because he had a weird, like, you know, like the thing he did. Right. But he had this point when he was talking about being like a white guy, where he was like, it's great to be a white guy. And it's like, I'm not saying it's good that it's great to be a white guy, but you're an asshole if you don't admit that.
Yeah.
And that's how I feel about my position right now, where it's like, it's not great that I'm more shielded than other people, but I should probably admit it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't know, all the best for your country.
We'll see. We'll see.
So in terms of your plans then for the future with your kind of like social media presence and things, like what are the plans?
I have no idea. I've been thinking about that. So like, this is going to be like a weird tangent, but it's going to loop back into your question. Before Jubilee, I was on Mr. Beast. And I stumbled into that as well. But there were a lot of people who I met from the video I was in, where the way that they kind of, you know, navigated their social media presence in the wake of the video coming out made me realize that a lot of people think of it as this huge break to even have 3 seconds on someone's screen somewhere.
Yeah.
And so many people would, you know, especially in Los Angeles, would kind of cut their leg off to be able to be in a viral video, because a lot of people maybe have a little bit more self-confidence than I do, to put it nicely, in this idea that like step 1, be in the background of the video for 3 seconds. Step 2, question mark. Step 3, I have 1 million followers, right? It doesn't really seem to work out for them most of the time, but I am aware of the fact that I have kind of, within the Jubilee audience, people know who I am. There are people interested in talking to me who can then kind of, route traffic back to my channels or, accounts. And I haven't done too much with them. And I feel like maybe I should. And I'm at the point where I think, stay tuned to anyone who's interested. Like, I think I will probably start doing something, but I don't know what yet.
Yeah, look, I think the bad side of all YouTube and stuff, right, is that the audience capture kind of effect, and it can be like a relentless treadmill of content. And I personally try to avoid my channel being like that, because I don't want it to be like a second job or something. So
Yeah,
I wouldn't say it's like a good thing to do for the sake of it, but 100%, like, I enjoy your like breakdowns of things that you've done, and I would enjoy, I don't know, like ecology information or something.
Yeah, I'd love to do educational content. I'd really enjoy that. And it'd be such like a pivot, but because that is something I do. I find it really gratifying to, like I said, I'll drive to like a science museum or a zoo or an aquarium, and I'll spend 4 hours just talking to members of the public. And it's like, I might talk to 7 people on a shift. And in that context, even if like a few hundred people watch a video, it's like, oh, like if I talk to a few hundred people in person, that'd be a successful day. And so I think that's the most likely thing for me to do, probably, is educational content.
You could maybe a bad suggestion. You could do like a setup, because maybe it put people off talking to you, but maybe American context is different. You could do like a setup with like a GoPro chest mounted, talking about these things or something, or I don't know what
like going up to like having talks on like man on the street sort of stuff.
If you're having these like conversations in a museum with people, and it's
I would. I'm very hesitant. So like I have said that no one really cares. My analogy at the start of our conversation today, where I said being on Jubilee is like being on stage at a big concert where almost no one really cares. Of the few people who do care, some of them are really crazy, and I don't want people to know like.
Yeah. Oh, that's a good point.
Yeah. But no, I definitely like. I also was honestly thinking of just like a lot of people I've met just go live every day for a couple hours.
Yeah.
And maybe like I don't want to do like a debate thing, but maybe just like a variety show or something.
Yeah. I think call-ins and things can work. It can get. I've had a lot of weird, because I used to do a lot of call-ins, and there were just some like weird people and situations, but it can be interesting when you figure out like who's calling it and stuff.
Something I want to do something, because I especially if like I don't try to make this like a job or something, right? I think I have really found it gratifying to engage with people in the wake of these Jubilee things, because there's a lot of thoughtful and interesting people. And then it's like, oh, great, I get to have a conversation with someone, right? Like this, like if this were just you wanted to just, like have a Zoom convo with me and it wasn't even for anything, I would have really enjoyed it. So I think anything where like, if nobody saw it, I would still find it satisfying. I think that should probably be like my, my sort of compass. But yeah, as of now, if anyone wants to see my stuff, the YouTube is Greg Does Videos, and then my Instagram and TikTok are both Greg from Video and the number 1. So very professional, very catchy.
I've put the link to your YouTube in the description as well, so if people want
convenience,
they can go down there, click on that, and find your stuff. Awesome. Well, I think maybe if we wrap it up then around there, Greg. But yeah, it's been really nice talking to you.
Yeah, this has been great, man.
Look forward to seeing you on future Jubilee episodes.
Yeah. Well. And anytime you want to talk about anything, reach out. Great. My schedule's I'm busy, but my schedule's very flexible, and so I can always make time for things.
Awesome. Well, thanks everyone. End the stream there.
Great.